Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. During the question and answer session, please press star 1. Today's conference is being recorded. If you have any objections, you may disconnect at this time. Now I'd like to turn the meeting over to Anthony Perry. Thank you. You may begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you on the West Coast, I would still say good morning for another hour. My name is Anthony Perry, and I am the Associate Director of Technology Services for the FDIC's Division of Risk Management Supervision. We want to thank each and every one of you for taking time to meet with us today and to listen to the information that we'd like to share and provide your feedback or your questions to that information. We wanted to take this opportunity to provide an update to offer more information on the standardized approach to reviewing imaged loan documents. In this session, we'll discuss the initiative's goals, strategy, expected impact, lessons learned from recent testing, and the next steps. The session will be recorded for training and reference purposes, and this presentation and the materials associated from today's call will be appended to the recently issued Financial Institution Letter 4-2019 in the coming weeks. In addition to providing general information, we will open the phone lines at the end of our discussion so that we can accept your comments and questions and feedback, and we will try to answer them as to the best of our ability at that time. To set the context of this discussion, in 2017, the FDIC, along with other FFIEC member agencies, initiated an examination modernization project. The objective of this project is to identify and assess ways to improve the effectiveness, efficiency, and quality of examination processes, particularly through increased leveraging of technology in an effort to reduce unnecessary regulatory burden. The Standardized Export Initiative that we're discussing today is a direct outgrowth of the larger examination modernization effort. In April 2018, the FDIC issued Financial Institution Letter 22-2018, which announced the Standardized Export of Image Loan Documents initiative. This was developed in response to a growing request for more remote examination activity capabilities. This initiative leverages a standardized export package along with a universal file image viewer to allow FDIC staff to view image loan documentation within FDIC systems from any location. Before bringing the concept to the broader industry, we validated general technology and processes during several proof-of-concept exercises. These exercises confirmed that exporting image loan data into a standardized format has significant potential to simplify loan review activities and reduce burden on financial institutions. We then solicited participation from financial institutions to further test and validate the related processes. To discuss the objectives, the processes, and our lessons learned, I'd like to hand it over to our project management team, Megan Karnowski and Megan Corey, to go over the specifics.
Thank you, Anthony. This is Megan Karnowski. Consistent with the goals of our examination modernization project, the implementation of this initiative to standardize the export of image loan documents has striven to reduce the burden on our financial institutions by eliminating the need to train regulatory staff on bank systems, as well as to facilitate the exchange of the documentation needed to support examination conclusions. Additionally, leveraging the standardized export and universal file image viewer allows for loan review activities to be conducted remotely if so desired, thereby reducing space requirements for exam teams and limiting the impact to daily operations at the financial institution. Providers of loan imaging software develop the functionality to create the standardized export of image loan documents. This produces a package of requested loan documents and identifying information about these documents. This standardized export helps to facilitate the transfer of information to the FDIC and then the subsequent review of these documents within the FDIC's Universal File Viewer. Specifically, the identifying information within the export includes 7 data elements for each document. These identifiers leverage pre-existing information contained within the image loan system and should not require the collection of any additional data. These 7 data fields include CIF number, CIF meaning Customer Information File, which is also sometimes referred to as the borrower ID, the CIF name, account number, if applicable, such as a loan account, document name, which is the actual file name of the document, a document description, such as a tax return 2014, a document category, which in the case of the tax return might be something like financial statements, a document date context, which again, for the case of tax return, might be 12/31/2014. As discussed, these 7 data elements aid in organizing the information for examiners. The graphic shown here on slide 6 depicts how that data is used by the Universal File Viewer. This application, coupled with the standardized export, allows examiners to view documents on one largely consistent interface, regardless of financial institution or imaging provider. And now I'm going to hand it off to Megan Corey, who will discuss more of our efforts to date and our lessons learned.
Thank you, Megan. To date, the FDIC has completed numerous rounds of testing with various loan software providers and financial institutions, both in initial proof of concept testing and broader pilot testing, in an effort to validate the technical specifications and related business processes. We've also collected information about the imaging practices of FDIC-supervised financial institutions so we can better assess the impact and need for remote review activities. The pilot testing period was first announced in the financial institution letter that Anthony referenced earlier, that is Financial Institution Letter 22/2018, entitled Advisory, FDIC Conducting Testing of the Standardized Export of Image Loan Documents. This bill was released in April 2018 and was accompanied by a similar webinar held on May 16, 2018. A recording of the prior presentation can be accessed via that fill, if desired. We felt pilot testing was important to see if use of the standardized export offered the desired efficiencies. This testing was conducted from June 2018 to January 2019. During this time, we conducted several examinations using the standardized export of image loan documents. These examinations were conducted at banks ranging in asset size from $130 million to $1.4 billion and encompassed several participating loan imaging providers. Participation by all parties was on a voluntary basis. Overall, testing results were positive. However, we did identify several lessons learned that we wanted to discuss in more detail. First, there were barriers to adoption. Specifically, cost and time frame for implementation have slowed adoption of the standardized export. Software providers may charge for the installation and license for the export functionality. Also, because service requests often need to be scheduled to install and set up the export tool, advance notice is required. In some instances, software providers were unable to schedule an installation prior to an examination due to competing tasks. Therefore, it is best to initiate conversations with your loan imaging software provider as soon as possible, or at a minimum, a couple of months prior to an upcoming examination, to improve the likelihood that the installation can be completed in a timely manner. The FDIC is also continuing to explore opportunities with these providers to reduce costs. Next, we have observed that variations in document indexing and related mapping processes can result in incomplete export packages. Therefore, it is critical for loan imaging providers and financial institutions to thoroughly discuss and review a bank's indexing processes and data fields so they can be mapped appropriately. In addition, any unique circumstances, for example, a recent core conversion or a recent asset or bank acquisition, should be discussed to better determine the eligibility for using the standardized export process. We also learned that miscommunication regarding examination timelines may adversely impact the ability to leverage this export functionality on an examination. Therefore, clear communication about upcoming examination dates, including exam start dates and deadlines to provide documentation, are critical to ensure data is received in a timely manner and to avoid delays. The FDIC is also drafting guidance for these participating providers to offer additional insight on the examination process and related timelines. Lastly, we identified that some enhancements to the FDIC technical environment are needed to improve the efficiencies and usability of this process, including file transfer capabilities. The FDIC is currently exploring and implementing various technical improvements. While these efforts are underway, participation in the Standardized Export Initiative may be restricted to ensure consistent performance. While we identified some potential concerns or limitations, testing demonstrates that the standardized export of image loan documents does offer operational value by addressing the growing request for off-site examination activities. As a result, we plan to expand use of the standardized export on a broader scale. Broader adoption of the standardized export is not expected to significantly impact financial institutions or their examination processes. Use and development of the standardized export remains voluntary for all parties, including financial institutions and loan imaging software providers. Institutions do not need to alter existing loan imaging practices, and banks that have not adopted a loan imaging system are not expected or required to do so. Preferences of both financial institutions and FDIC management will be considered when determining if and how to use the standardized export at an exam, specifically as it relates to off-site versus on-site examination activities. Going forward, financial institutions will be surveyed during pre-examination discussions regarding loan imaging practices and providers. This information will allow us to determine potential eligibility to use the standardized export. Eligibility will be determined based on the availability of the standardized export functionality, which varies by provider. There are also considerations for software versions as well as other factors that can impact your eligibility. If financial institutions are given a preliminary eligibility determination, they can reach out to their bank's loan imaging software provider to confirm eligibility and gather more information needed to make a decision regarding use of the export functionality. Remember, you do not need to wait to be contacted about an upcoming exam to gather this information from your loan imaging providers. This graphic on slide 16 depicts a high-level process flow for using the standardized export and offers some insight into the impact on the exam process. Please note, in the second step, institution gathers image documents and related information. During this step, the financial institution will export specifically requested imaged loan documents into the standardized data file format. The FDIC will provide means to securely transfer this data to the FDIC. Information security is of utmost importance throughout this process. Files are encrypted at all stages, and access to documentation is restricted to applicable examination staff. Only those documents needed to support examination findings will be retained. All other documentation is purged 90 days after the examination start date. Note, examiners may refer to the standardized export process as the 5 export or something similar. Just so you know, this is in reference to the File Image Viewer for Examinations, or 5 application, which is the examiner-facing piece of this process that you saw earlier in this presentation. I'll now send it back to Anthony to discuss our next steps.
Thank you, Megan. I think it's important to note that when we're discussing next steps, you take into account all of the lessons learned that Megan Karnowski and Megan Corey went over, some of the technical limitations that we have and some of the adoption practices that we've seen and some of the barriers to entry for this particular initiative. Implementation and adoption of the standardized export functionality will continue to be assessed for possible enhancements. So your participation and your feedback are going to be critical to that process. We will continue to work to incorporate usability enhancements to further streamline the process, as well as our technical capability enhancements that will allow us to expand the use of this tool to a broader audience. In addition, the FDIC will continue to explore opportunities to facilitate remote examination activities. Testing demonstrates that a multifaceted, multi-tool approach may be necessary to address the unique needs and products within the industry. The FDIC also plans to continue working cooperatively with the other federal and state regulatory agencies to determine if and how the standardized export can be leveraged and incorporated into their existing examination practices and processes. This is particularly important given the impact on joint examination work. Also, this functionality is primarily targeted for use on safety and soundness examinations at this time. However, we want to continue to explore opportunities to use the standardized export for other examination types, including consumer compliance examinations and specialty examination types. We are completing tests in these areas and evaluating internal processes for broader adoption. Material updates will be communicated as the project progresses further. At this point, operator, could you ask if we have any questions? And I will take a few moments and summarize and see if anybody has any comments or questions that we can address.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press *1. Please ensure your phone is unmuted and clearly record your name when prompted. To withdraw your question, please press *2. One moment, please, to see if we have any questions or comments.
While we're waiting, I'll begin some summary comments here. The FDIC will be expanding the use of standardized export of image loan documents. Examiners will continue surveying bank staff during pre-examination discussions to collect information about loan imaging practices and determine potential eligibility to use the standardized export. However, financial institutions do not need to wait to explore this functionality. They can discuss the process with their providers to determine their availability at any time. As a matter of fact, the earlier the better. It is important to remember that use and development of the standardized export is voluntary and will remain voluntary for all parties. Operator, did we have any questions?
Yes, we do have a question from Jim Caldwell. Your line is now open.
Yes. The question is, will you be using the FDIC Connect as the connection, or will this be a different type of connection? And the reason for the call, the question is that we've found that FDIC Connect is rather sluggish, at least in the past it has been, and would suggest that that's a very important component of this strategy, standardized export.
Jim, that's a great question. Thank you. Part of our lessons learned, we did discover that the file sizes are very large when we're dealing with standardized image loan data sets. And we have been working with a tool at this point called GlobalScape, but we are looking forward to using more simpler tools, if you will, in the future. We're working towards that with our technology teams, so I can tell you, no, we do not intend to use FDIC Connect to transfer these files.
That would be good.
Understood.
Our next question comes from John West. Your line is now open.
Yes. I wanted to ask, will auditing firms be able to use these exports to conduct off-site reviews as well? And if so, I wanted to ask how they would be able to, would they be using a 5 application or equivalent software? How would that work?
Sure. Thank you for your question. So as it stands right now, some auditing firms do leverage a similar process. They have custom exports that some of these providers do create, and they have their own standard viewers to review the documentation. So each provider has chosen to implement this in a different way, and I know some providers have export tools, again, that are included in this package for auditors, While others could hypothetically leverage this export, they would just need to build their viewer on top of this, which is, my understanding, is a fairly simplistic task. So other parties could leverage this standardized export, and it's just a function of creating the viewer piece to work along with it.
Okay, so then those firms will not be given direct access to the FIDE application?
No, but the bigger ask would be having access to the underlying data, and that would be readily accessible if provided by the institution. And again, they would just have to map a tool to view that data in that format.
Okay.
But the FDIC would not be providing that data to them.
Okay. Thank you.
Our next question comes from Matthew. Your line is open.
Hi. Can you first go back to the second slide? I'd like to see that again. That just kind of gave examples of the fields that are needed. And in addition to that, my question is, for the standardized file format export, is that going to be a PDF or is it a TIFF, or what is that final export supposed to be?
So the exported format that comes out is actually an XML file. So those 7 required fields, and I'll quickly go over those again. That's CIF name and number, the account number, the document or file name, the document description, the document category, and the document date context. Those all spit out in an XML file, and that's what we use to then populate the standardized application that we use at the FDIC.
Okay, can you go to the next slide? I'm sorry, I meant the next one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay, and your file format is XML for these.
Right, and so then the actual documents themselves we accept in any general widely used format. So most often we see PDFs, we see TIFF files, we see Microsoft native objects, so your Word documents, your Excel spreadsheets. We'll accept documents in any of those widely used formats.
Okay, okay, I have a better understanding now. Thank you.
Yeah, so let me rehash that a little bit too, just so it's a little bit more clear. The standardized export is 2 parts. It's all of those documents, so those PDFs, those TIFF files, those Word documents, and then the second piece is that XML document with those 7 data fields for each of those documents. Those 7 data fields are what populates our viewer and allows us to identify, find, and sort those documents that we're looking for each borrower and relationship. Thank you.
Jim Newhall, your line is now open.
Yes. My question is regarding actual functionality and interactions between the off-site loan review examiners and the banks that are being reviewed as it regards to clearing exceptions and having discussions with the lenders or the credit departments about, specific aspects of the credit decision and the credit process. Did you all get positive feedback or any feedback at all from your trial banks? I've always found, having them right next door to my office or, wherever they happen to be in the boardroom or this, that, or the other, is easier to, in real time to get exceptions cleared and have discussions regarding the nature of credits.
Sure, thank you for your question. So we, from a piloting standpoint, we did not dictate what examination processes should be in place. We, again, defer, as always, to management preferences. So if management still elected to have staff on site, the examination staff would still be there and working closely with your staff at the institution to answer those questions and, as you said, to clear those document exceptions. Now, in the case of off-site use of the standardized export, we really, I think it's a function of how the exam team communicates in general. I think if we lay out the expectation early on that you're going to have general check-ins once a week and exceptions are cleared with a certain party, I think you'll see much higher success rates in that field. Now, we've always continued to communicate that we should not be assuming this documentation is missing. You should be verifying that with the institution to determine if this is in fact a document exception. So we're still, is my understanding, continuing to give institutions a chance to clear any of these document exceptions. Again, this is a point-in-time export, so something that was scanned after that initial export date may not be in our side of the viewer. So we would obviously still want to give you that opportunity. But if you ultimately want to be able to walk down the hall and talk to your examiners, that is still your prerogative, and you can still do so. We ultimately, again, defer to your preferences in that way. Or you can leverage FDIC Connect or a similar electronic tool to try to clear those exceptions as well.
Well, I was just curious, in any of the test instances where banks did choose the off-site review method, if they had positive or negative feedback in the way that they were communicating, did they find it easy or did they find it difficult, or do you know?
I think the most complex situation that we ran into would be if there was missing documentation. So of those, and that was obviously coming out of one of our lessons learned, if we realized that some documentation was missing from the files, we typically still had staff on site. You know, I think our senior management here does not ever envision a fully off-site exam, so we still like to have those folks on the ground that can kind of clear up some of those exceptions and provide staff with the missing documentation. Now, from a discussion standpoint, we have not heard any negative feedback with the ability to discuss loans with off-site staff. I think they've still been able, from our understanding, is that institutions have still felt comfortable with contacting the examination staff and having those discussions as they would on site, obviously just via phone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, as a reminder, if you do have any further questions or comments, please press *1 and record your name. Again, please press *1. We do have a question from Scott Parker. Your line is now open.
Yes, thank you. I was asking about the availability of the data sharing for banks that are on a hosted network. There seem to be some limitations in that regard, or there were cost prohibitive factors that came into play, and I'm just wondering if there's going to be any solutions going forward for banks on a hosted network.
Well, to summarize your question, make sure we understand it. Is your question related to banks that are hosting their data up at their vendor? So that's the first part of it. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
Okay, and can you explain your question one more time, please?
Yeah, it just seemed as we were exploring the availability of using this data sharing, this was last year, that to do so in our environment was relatively expensive, as opposed to what I understand a less expensive situation for banks that have an internal IT division. So I'm just wondering if that's something that might be changing going forward as this becomes more widely utilized and accepted.
I understand your question now, and we do recognize that there's a lot of flavors of implementations out there right now. Some banks are serviced in-house. Some banks are using software as a service with their vendors, and ultimately, your relationship with your vendor is the financial institution's relationship. And we are not in the middle of the cost discussions, but we do know that cost has been a barrier to some people using this capability. We do know that the cost from the vendors we've been working with, some of them vary, but depending on whether it's software as a service versus in-house. But again, that is going to be unique to every organization and your relationship, financial relationship you have with your vendor. So I would say that that's just a conversation that you're going to end up having with them, and you have to see whether there's enough benefit to doing this versus whatever cost that you're being presented with, and to make an informed decision at the time that the examination is coming near. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next question comes from Julie Ellis. Your line is now open.
Hi, I was just curious, not all of the interested parties could be on the call today, and I was wondering if the presentation slides would be made available to participants so that we could share that within our institutions.
Hi, Julie. Yes, they will. Well, we're going to make the slide presentation and a recorded version of this discussion available. It will be associated with the fill in the coming weeks. It'll take a little time because we need to make sure that the recorded version has closed captions incorporated and those types of things, but we do intend to associate it with the fill.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chris Sims, your line is now open.
Hi. Does the FDIC have a list of suppliers or vendors that currently support this export process?
At this time, we're not in a position to be able to specifically identify vendors that are participating, and part of the reason is because it's completely voluntary, and it's a business decision that those particular organizations are making. But we can say that when it comes time to do pre-exam planning, if the examiner in charge identifies that a bank is potentially eligible based on the vendor that we believe that they're using, that we'll ask the question at the time, you know, do you want to participate in this initiative or use the standardized export? And if the bank says, that sounds very interesting, then at that point the bank would be reaching out to their vendor to say, am I eligible? And that's what it all comes down to is can I do it, am I eligible? And then, you know, the costs come into, you know, the decision-making factor for them at that point. But that list is going to be growing over time. But just because a vendor is on the list of vendors who are supporting it doesn't mean that their entire portfolio is eligible. That's a decision that they are making looking at each of their products.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Brenda Wampler, your line is now open.
Thank you. You mentioned you tested with several banks. Could you provide a listing to us of the different systems that you have tested?
Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to provide a list of systems by vendor because that would go back to kind of with the last question. You know, what we can say is that if vendors have chosen to participate, they are all creating their capabilities or their extract, or I'll call it export capabilities, in the same way as every other vendor in terms of the end result is going to be those 7 data elements and the associated images. So while we can't say, you know, which banks participated using which vendors, because that is their business information, we can say that the end result is the standard file. And if we provide that information to the vendors and if they choose to adopt it, then everybody's going to be doing it basically the same way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last question comes from Michael Moran. Your line is now open.
This is Mike. Along those same lines, so if we can't get a list of the vendors, how would, if we were to talk to our imaging vendors, how would we describe this tool to them to find out whether or not they had participated or are going to be participating? Is there should we refer to this as 5 or what?
So the providers that have worked with us in the past would be familiar if you refer to it as the FDIC export or a 5 export. They should understand what you're getting at. And to that point, if you're working with a provider that is not yet offering this functionality and they have an interest in doing so, you know, please give them the contact information and share this the presentation materials that we went through today or the previous presentation from May of 2018, and we can start to have communications with them if they are interested in moving forward. But again, this is a voluntary process for everyone.
And that contact information is in the fill. So yeah, if you get on the phone with your vendor and you really get the feeling that they don't understand what you're talking about, please ask them to reach out to us.
And if we have got custom code and we want to be able to write to the interface ourselves, is there some spec available for us?
Yes, please email the 5@fdic.gov email inbox that is noted on the last slide in this presentation.
Thank you.
I show no further questions.
Okay, so we wanted to address some of the questions that came out in the WebEx session. So I think we've addressed some of these, but those that we have not yet addressed, will the standardized export totally replace FDIC Connect? Now, again, this export is specific to loan documentation, and again, those loans that we request for an examination. This would not include transfers for any policies, procedures, financial information that is transferred via FDIC Connect. So you would still be relying on FDIC Connect to share that type of documentation for the exam. So it would not replace FDIC Connect fully. We also have a question related to the financial institutions expected to validate the security of GlobalScape. We've gotten this question a lot, and I think it's very valid. As an IT examiner, I really appreciate your thoroughness. I will say the architecture of GlobalScape is nearly identical to that of FDIC Connect. It is not a cloud-based solution. It is completely on-prem at the FDIC, and the security is consistent with FDIC Connect. So I would encourage you to do any due diligence that you would do to an FDIC system such as FDIC Connect, but they are largely the same. They just have different settings. One other question related to the slides. Anthony mentioned that they will ultimately be posted, but it can take some time for them to get processed. If you need them immediately, please go ahead and email the 5@fdic.gov email box, and we'll get a copy of those sent to you.
There's another question about what if a financial institution doesn't use the CIF number? So in this case, we're looking for some identifying number. So in case it might be a borrower ID, or in some instances we've seen a social security number. So the information we pass off to run that export actually includes the CIF number that we've pulled from your core loan imaging, or excuse me, from your core systems for your information about your asset portfolio, which may be that CIF number or a social security number. So that's the information that we pass back when running the export file. So it's really the image that's pulled out, or excuse me, the information that's pulled out of your core processing that we push back to get the information out of your imaging system then thereafter.
Okay, so operator, were there any other questions waiting?
I show no further questions. If you do have any further questions, please press *1 and record your name again. Please press *1.
Oh, okay. I do see a question that came in for us online. It says, will voluntary become required? Very good question, and no, it will not become required. It is voluntary. It will remain voluntary. That's how it was envisioned, and that's how it is intended to be used. No other questions, operator?
I show one more question. One moment, please.
Okay.
George Austin, your line is now open.
Hi, this is George. I was just curious. You told us that the banks tested so far had asset sizes between $130 million and $1.4 billion. I was curious, do you have a breakdown? Were those mostly residential mortgages that have more standardized sets of documents, or was there a mixture of commercial loans in there?
So during this testing period, we primarily focused on our safety and soundness examinations, which largely focus on credits that are, of commercial nature, maybe agriculture, cultural. Those tend to not be conforming mortgage loans that we look at. So we haven't seen a great deal of pulls focused on consumer credits, but we have done a little work with our compliance division. So we have pulled that type of data, but it's not consistent. We pull all different loan types to try to gather, results of the export and if it's working properly. So we specifically do try to capture a diverse set during our testing.
Thank you.
I show no further questions.
So we got in another question online as well. It looks like we've talked about the loan documents, but what about the credit information if it's not housed within the loan documents?
So the information we are pulling out of the system, the documents themselves and the information that goes with them, is really tied to two things. It's tied to either that CIF number or borrower ID and then the account number. So sometimes we don't have an account number, which I'm thinking this is what this question is getting at. So if you have financial statements, sometimes they're tied to just a borrower and not an individual account. So when we work on creating the export with our vendors, we really try to talk through these kinds of situations. If they have these cases of documents where they're tied to a borrower but do not have an account number, we still want those documents. We're trying to pull all of that information out of the system. So theoretically, as long as it's in the imaging system and it's tied to a CIF number that we can pull, we can get that document.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank the project team for pulling some good information together, and we want to thank all of the organizations and the examination teams that have tested with us to try to prove the concepts out. We've learned a lot. We've learned a lot. This is a complicated thing that has a lot of value to it, but it's not like throwing a ball in the air and you know, just watching it land somewhere. There's a lot of process that makes all the magic happen. And a couple of the things that we've learned is that, you know, the FDIC's technology infrastructure needs to be positioned for success in this area, and that's going to require some improvements. And what that means is that while, you know, adoption may be asked for and people may want to use this, financial institutions may want to, in some cases we may have to offer you an alternative process because we have a technology limitations, we'll say it during that week. But we will keep you informed, we'll keep you engaged with this, and we can commit that as part of the larger exam modernization effort, the FDIC will continuously monitor adoption and impact of the standardized export and related processes. We are already working to implement enhancements and will do so as needed going forward. We want to thank you for joining the information sharing call today. If you have any additional questions or comments, please reach out to the FIVE project team at FIVE, that's F-I-V-E, at FDIC.gov, or you can reach out to me directly. My contact information is included on slide 19 in this presentation, and it's in the fill. The fill is going to have it for you immediately. The slides, again, and the video will take a few weeks to have produced and available for your review. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. This concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating. You may disconnect at this time.